Does President Trump actually care about his legacy? Well, I'll tell you, it's a fine line to walk. The line between doing what you want and doing what you think people want and what you think people will think highly of you for. Trump is walking in the direction, consistently, of doing what he wants, or perhaps instead doing what Elon Musk wants. Who knows what kind of deal they've got going behind the scenes. But I've never seen a president so willing to destroy their credibility and destroy their legacy. So he served a first term. He got elected to a second term. He can't get a third term. He's not up for re-election. You would think that with this last term, he might be a little more cautious, a little more willing to moderate, but no, as I talked about in my most recent video on Trump and moderation, the idea of Trump being more moderate is laughable. It's not going to happen. Trump is not going to become more moderate. You can look at that video. He's just getting more and more extreme. He's just getting worse and worse. There's no legacy that is going to be commendable whatsoever when this guy leaves office. I'll tell you that. Nothing that he'll be known for. The most powerful thing, I think, will be that photo he had of him shaking his fist after the assassination attempt. Right-wingers will, prop that up and be like, look at this historic photo. Look at this. It's so beautiful. He said, fight, fight, fight. They won't have any actual policy to point to. The economy will tank. The rest of the world will despise the United States because of his incompetent, bloviating leadership, so-called leadership. They'll have nothing to point to by the end of his term. They'll just have pictures and memes and vibes, and that's it. So, look, being hard right doesn't mean that you have a bad legacy. It does not. Plain and simple. You can have a great legacy and be a hard right president. Think of President Ronald Reagan. Reagan served 8 years. Reagan had scandals like the Iran-Contra. He had tax cuts for the uber wealthy, in addition to some tax cuts for the middle class. But he had foreign policy accomplishments. He had a bad foreign policy in terms of neoliberalism in certain areas of the world, but he also presided over basically the end of the Cold War. I mean, it really did happen under George H.W. Bush, but Reagan really got the ball rolling. The Cold War had been going on for far too long, and Reagan comes in with the Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. The economy generally does pretty well throughout his presidency. There's a recession in the early 80s. And yeah, it's booming by the end of his presidency. Of course, he blew up the deficit, which is pretty controversial, especially if you're a conservative. You should care about the deficit. But, he was a hard right president. Governor of California, too, by the way. So governor of a blue state. So a little bit of progressive credibility from back in the day, back in the 60s and 70s when he was governor of California. And Republicans love him. Centrists usually love him. Even moderate Democrats sometimes love him. And it's only really staunch leftists who despise him. And they would say he's actually like one of the worst presidents. Like he got the ball rolling on the worst aspects of contemporary neoliberalism, crony capitalism, corruption, and destruction of any sort of viable welfare state in the US, and just complete and utter deregulation. So yeah, he is reviled by some, but most people who aren't hard left tend to love him. They do. And Trump, he just couldn't do what Reagan could do. He couldn't walk into the office and act like a normal, charming person. Reagan wasn't going out there and calling Democrats vermin, calling illegal immigrants or immigrants in general animals. He was not sending people to El Salvadorian prisons on the grounds that they're supposedly Venezuelan gang members or depriving them of due process. He had some blunders that are just ridiculous, like the AIDS epidemic. He fumbled that. He wouldn't even say AIDS for a long time. So don't get me wrong. There's aspects of Reagan's legacy which are disastrous, but overall he's got a solid one. Same with George H.W. Bush. And you know what? George W. Bush's approval rating has been going up even among Democrats since he left office. Will the same thing happen with Trump? No, absolutely not. Not unless someone even worse comes into office afterwards, which J.D. Vance, if you are watching this, please do not take this as a challenge. I know that you're a depraved lunatic who hates rule of law and ironically is a lawyer. He's a former lawyer, so he knows better, but he wants to destroy the country and he's willing to lie in order to get immigrants sent to prisons in El Salvador. He's willing to lie about Haitian immigrants and say that they're eating cats and dogs. So he's not a stupid guy. He's very smart. He's got a scheme. He's got a plan, and he might even steal the 2028 election in order to win. So please don't get any ideas. But yeah, maybe some far-right Republican will come along and make Trump seem moderate. The second term of Trump seem moderate, because the first term of Trump already seems moderate compared to this second term. The right just keeps showing us, you think we can't get worse? We're going to get worse. They send even worse cretins out to Washington, D.C. to join President Trump in destroying America and destroying the welfare state and destroying the administrative state and making a complete and utter mockery of our government and our country on the world stage. So, does Trump actually care about what people think of him? I mean, he's got to, right? Nobody but a complete sociopath would literally not care at all about what people think about them. Look, it's seen as the alpha male thing to do to not care what other people think about you. Like, whatever, let them have their opinions. As long as you know that what you're doing is right, then you're good. But we all have that kind of innate thing in us that says, if everyone says I'm wrong, I might be wrong. And Trump is just like, no, my solid 20-some% of the country who simps for me, who bows down before me, who worships me, they say I'm doing things right. Everyone else in the country says I'm doing everything wrong, but, I'll take it. As long as these people worship me, as long as Elon Musk continues to post on X about how great I am and how I'm standing up to the establishment and standing up for democracy, the most laughable claim you'll ever hear in your entire life, then yeah, no, I'm good. I get to violate the Constitution, and so-called constitutional conservatives like Ted Cruz, they'll stand up for me and they'll tell their followers who might not have liked me in the primaries in 2016, Donald Trump is so amazing, he's so great, he's standing up for the Constitution. We need a constitutional conservative president, and that's what we've got in Donald Trump. So yeah, he's just focused on appeasing this minority of the population, this loud minority. But the really weird thing is he's not actually helping them out. He's not. He's driving a sword through them, you could say. Or at least a knife right now. Maybe the sword's coming later. But the only people that he's given any sort of candy to, given any goodies to, is the uber wealthy. That is the section of the population that his policies are designed to help. That's them, not you. If you're middle class and you voted for Trump, I'm telling you right now, you were duped. But guess what? There's room for you in the right lane. There's room for you. Trump doesn't care about his legacy. He cares about pandering to people who are obsessed with stuff like transgender people in sports. Transgender people in sports. What is that doing to the country? Is that causing the stock market to collapse? No, it's not. Is it causing climate change? No. Did it cause the wildfires in Los Angeles? No. Did it cause any hurricanes? No. I mean, I get that it's a whole doctrine that the right wing has adopted of blame wokeness for everything. Economic collapse, environmental collapse, plane crashes, all that stuff. We can blame it all on wokeness and DEI, and that's the way it goes. But nobody actually believes these clowns, right? It's all just a charade. So, look, if you're middle class, if you're lower middle class, if you're poor, and you voted for Trump, for gosh sakes, you've got to see that this guy is not going to help you out in the long run. Now, we still have to address, okay, what's the deal with Trump? Does he care about his legacy? Is there something that he's got in store for us within the next 3 years that's going to actually cement him as having a good legacy? I mean, he's already got the legacy of being the second president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms, the first Republican to do so, because Grover Cleveland was a Democrat, the first convicted felon president, which, great thing to have as part of your legacy, great thing to have. So what exactly is the history book going to show with regard to President Trump that's something to be like, okay, we got that done under him in his second term. In his first term, people might boast about Operation Warp Speed, like, holy cow, he got this vaccine out so quick. Although public opinion towards that has kind of cratered, I think. Even his own base is not happy about that. They're like, oh, it was experimental, it was bad. So he takes flack from his own base, and he might just disavow it. And so the history books might not even care about that because he's going to disavow Operation Warp Speed. What has this man done that actually helps regular people? That's something that's going to go down. Like the Civil Rights Act under LBJ. Think about him signing that. He's a Democratic president. JFK gets assassinated in 63. LBJ is like, yeah, John F. Kennedy, he supported the Civil Rights Act. He wanted to give African Americans all the same rights that white Americans do, and I think we need to do this. And he harnessed that emotional energy that the American public had, the sadness they had about this young, charismatic president dying in office, getting his head blown off. And he said, okay, we're going to give civil rights to African Americans. We're going to tell the South that it's time to get your act together. And so segregation, finally started to come to an end under Johnson's presidency. The Voting Rights Act of 1965, Medicare, Medicaid, those things kind of saved his legacy from what he did with the Vietnam War. That whole Gulf of Tonkin resolution, the Tet Offensive, all that stuff that took place during his presidency that made it so hard for him to go out in public towards the end. That was like he was just being badgered by the public for it. There were people outside the White House chanting, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today? Pretty similar stuff to George W. Bush and the public opinion on the Iraq War with him. George W. Bush even has some things in his legacy that people are going to look back fondly on. Think of his reaction to 9/11, Medicaid Part D. He did some healthcare reform. He expanded community health centers. He behaved in a gentlemanly manner, which is not super helpful. It doesn't put food on the table for working class Americans. It doesn't help fix climate change. It doesn't help people have an easier time voting. But when you have a president who's acting like a cretin every day, who's posting unhinged rants on Truth Social, who's telling reporters that MSNBC and CNN are illegal. Trump said that about outlets that criticize him. They're illegal. Just a brazen violation of the First Amendment. You don't get to declare hostile news outlets, barely hostile, by the way, they're mostly sympathetic to him, those news outlets illegal? What on earth is wrong with you? So yeah, Bush at least respected news outlets which were critical of him. That's just one of the benefits of having a gentleman in office, someone who doesn't, treat the Constitution like complete and utter toilet paper in terms of their rhetoric. Now, obviously, in terms of policy, Bush violated the Constitution. So did Obama, so did Biden, so did Clinton. It's unfortunately not that uncommon of a thing. But with Trump, it's like, okay, there's not even the veneer of supporting the Constitution. All the other presidents had a veneer of supporting the Constitution. Trump doesn't have that. He doesn't. He violates the Constitution every single day. And you know what I'll tell you? I've been through law school, and constitutional law professors, their heads are spinning. They're like, do I have to revise my whole curriculum because of President Trump's second term? Like, does this all just mean nothing? When this goes up to the U.S. Supreme Court, are they going to change it all? In 2027, am I going to have to teach something entirely different? All because this douchebag takes office and thinks he can do whatever he wants? Same with Elon Musk. I mean, the same could be said of him. He comes in and he's like, yeah, I didn't even get elected. I get to do whatever I want. As Kyle Kulinski points out, if they don't suffer consequences for it, what is this going to say about our constitutional law? That, well, any rich asshole can come in there and control the government in whatever way they want, without being elected. And in fact, without even being born in the US, they come in there, their corporations get subsidized, and they get to say, well, I don't like this certain kind of spending. We're going to have to cut that, cancer research. That's very bad. That's waste, fraud, and abuse. And that's their only pretext for cutting anything. And even if it were true that it were wasteful, fraudulent, or abusive, it would still be unconstitutional because we have this thing called separation of powers in the United States. That brings me to the unitary executive theory. The unitary executive theory is a fat load of garbage. It used to be thoroughly rejected by the US Supreme Court, but now we've got people like Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito who are like, yeah, the president should have a lot of power. The president should have the sole power to do this and that. And Trump himself is out there, tweeting, posting on Truth Social, this stuff that very much humors that sentiment. Now, I would never accuse Trump of supporting unitary executive theory because he doesn't even know what it is. He doesn't understand the Constitution. He doesn't understand constitutional doctrine. He would never use those words. He probably doesn't even know what the word unitary or executive or theory means, but that's his attitude. He quoted Napoleon Bonaparte saying, "He who saves his country violates no laws." Isn't that so convenient for you? Now, obviously, he's not saving our country. He's sending it to hell in a handbasket. but I identify as saving my country, In my postmodern world, tax cuts for the uber wealthy and killing people by cutting government programs and destroying the environment and taking Greenland through military force, yeah, that's actually just saving your country. That stock market crash, that's a great way to save your country. Just ask Herbert Hoover. Yeah, he's saving his country, so he gets to claim that he's not breaking the law. I mean, he already broke the law before he took office and saved our country. He's a convicted felon. But now he's feeling insecure about the fact that everyone knows, even his supporters know, that he's a routine lawbreaker. 91 counts. So, yeah, he's like, oh, that's a sore spot for me. I'm the convicted felon president. And he actually ran against a prosecutor, Kamala Harris, who is not a convicted felon and who's kind of just a normal person, if not a bit of a word salady person who wasn't the best communicator at times. But she made the great point that, like, I was a prosecutor. I handled sex offenders. I handled fraudsters. I handled, like, bullies. So believe me when I say I know how to handle Donald Trump. And I think he's still insecure about her saying that, that he's like, shoot, I'm supposed to be the big tough prosecutor. I'm supposed to be the cop on the beat. And now I'm the convicted felon. And if it weren't for the fact that I were the president of the United States, I would be in prison wearing an orange jumpsuit to match my orange face. That's where he would be right now if he were not president of the United States. Or I should say, that's where he may be right now if he were not president of the United States. Something 2025, 2026, 2027. The legal system takes a while to work out its process. But yeah, he could very well be behind bars, and now he almost certainly never will be. The U.S. Supreme Court is thoroughly on his side. He got to appoint 3 justices in his first term. Jimmy Carter didn't get to appoint any Supreme Court justices in his single term. So he's the luckiest man on the planet. That will probably be the only thing that actually is notable about his legacy in terms of, okay, maybe that's interesting, getting 3 justices in his first term. And some of those justices are not as bad as Alito and Thomas. That's the best you can say about them is, well, Barrett's pretty respectable. She writes some okay opinions. Gorsuch, think about Bostic versus Clayton County. That was really helpful for transgender Americans. He joined the liberal justices and wrote a majority opinion that a lot of progressives love. So there's that. Kavanaugh, more moderate guy than you'd think he'd end up being. So yeah, his 3 Supreme Court justices who often do super serve him. Yeah, maybe they're the only kind of okay part about his legacy in some ways. Like if you squint hard enough, the First Step Act, maybe. But yeah, it's pretty barren in terms of sources of good stuff for his legacy. Just take a moment and ask yourself, 30 years from now, what are your kids gonna see in their history books about Donald Trump? What kind of good things are they gonna see? They're gonna have to, they can't bury the lead when it comes to this guy, the history book writers. They can't just not tell you he's a convicted felon. They can't just not tell you that he's an insurrectionist, that he incited an insurrection on our Capitol January 6, 2021. They can't just not tell you that he was twice impeached. They can't just not tell you that there was a recession under him in 2020. They can't just not tell you that he crashed the stock market in his first 3 months as president. They can't just not tell you all of this stuff that is so damning. All of this stuff that if it happened under a Democratic president such as Barack Obama or Joe Biden, Fox News would light those 2 up for it. They would be like, oh my God, this is the Democrat Party. This is how bad they are. This is Obama's the new Jimmy Carter. Biden's the new Jimmy Carter. They use Jimmy Carter as a punching bag. Jimmy Carter, look, he served a single term as president. There's not that much that he got done that is like, oh my God, I can't believe this, most amazing guy ever. People routinely rank him in the 20s as a president, sometimes even in the 30s, out of 45 presidents. So, he doesn't look super glamorous, but for crying out loud, what did he do after he left office? He worked on eradicating diseases, building houses for the poor, going to third world countries, helping people out. This is a guy who really doesn't care that much about himself. He cares about others. Well, obviously he did the right thing for himself because he lived to be 100 years old, which is freaking amazing. Longevity for the win, my man. But he went around helping other people. He didn't care about looking glamorous either. He was out there like with a black eye or something. There's those pictures of him. And he's just like, yeah, I'm going to do my thing. Could you imagine Donald Trump doing that? Damn near every picture of Trump, he's in a suit and a tie. And I mean, he's got to do that, right? God forbid we see Trump in a t-shirt or a tank top or something like that. When he's in a polo, he already looks like just this gelatinous blob, darn near Chris Christie levels. But yeah, this guy has never done manual labor. You put Trump behind a cash register, oh boy, he wouldn't even know how to work that thing. Construction, nope. Jimmy Carter can do that stuff. Jimmy Carter didn't even start any wars. People praised Trump for, oh, he didn't start any wars. Well, guess what? Jimmy Carter hasn't beat on that front. Jimmy Carter didn't start wars. And he didn't get a second term where he threatened to start wars either. Trump might start another war in this second term. He might go full neocon Don, which is exactly what a lot of progressives warned about during his first term. And you know what? Let's face it. Was he as bad on foreign policy as he could have been in his first term? Not necessarily, not necessarily. We didn't get a World War III under him. I'll give him that. And I'll say this, it's probably just sheer coincidence. We got lucky. We got lucky that Trump did not start World War III under his first term. We didn't have to worry about that under pretty much any president. Obviously FDR was World War II and Truman was World War II, but not under Eisenhower, none of those Cold War presidents, World War III, any sort of fears of that. I mean, there was a Cuban Missile Crisis under Kennedy, but young Kennedy, he handled it well. No World War III. And then this guy gets into office and it's like, oh yeah, no, I'm going to assassinate General Qasem Soleimani, a guy who actually works to fight terrorists and was beloved in his country. That ends up not leading to World War III. Biden gets elected, and you have these people basically, ever since the start of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, screeching that Biden is going to start World War III. Russia invaded Ukraine, but it's Biden who's going to start World War III. Riddle me that. Why are they so keen on defending Russia? Why? And then Trump gets into office and he's like, I'm going to end the Russia-Ukraine war. And he doesn't. It's still going on. He's not having them negotiate. Nope. But he is screaming at Zelensky. Great look for your legacy, by the way. The guy who's bravely standing up against autocracy, against authoritarianism, for democracy. He's not a perfect leader for sure. I would argue that he's done some things that constitute a violation of free speech if they would have happened in the US. But is he Vladimir Putin? No, he leagues better than Putin. And the fact that Trump is like, I have great conversations with Putin. Putin's a great guy. And he's calling Zelensky a dictator without elections. That is so damning. And you know what? I mentioned Ronald Reagan earlier in this video. What would Ronald Reagan say if he saw Trump simping for Putin? What would he say? He would say, well, I'm going to become a Democrat again. He left the Democratic Party in 1962 saying, I didn't leave the Democrats left me. Well, if Reagan were around in 2025, and you know what? I'm not saying he's a great guy or anything. I'm not praising him, but he would say, I didn't leave the Republican Party. The Republican Party left me. There's pictures of him schmoozing it up with Trump in 1987, by the way. Very different looking Trump back then. But if he could see what Trump would end up doing, in 1987 it was creeping towards the end of the Cold War too. If he could see into the future that Trump was simping for the leader of Russia, he would not shake Trump's hand. Or if he did, he would wash his hands after shaking it, because by God, that just goes against the Republican Party's values of the 80s. And the Republican Party's values of the 80s weren't even that great to begin with. So we've fallen backwards in terms of our standards. Or perhaps we haven't. Perhaps Trump struck some sort of deal with Putin. We don't really know. We know that there was Russian interference in 2016. Not Russian collusion as the Mueller report stated, but there was Russian interference, and that's something that's concerning. Was there Russian interference in 2012? In 2020? No. There's been no investigation finding that. But in 2016, when this man wins without getting the popular vote, there's Russian interference. They did find that. And there were a bunch of arrests based on that. His administration is going to be known for one where you have all these people going to jail too. And look, there's a saying often in self-improvement actually, where it's like, you are the combination of the 5 people that you hang out with the most. Who does Trump hang out with the most? I mean, I don't know if I could single out 5 people. Let's think about, J.D. Vance, Kash Patel, Laura Loomer. Laura Loomer, this psychopath who writes the most ridiculous tweets imaginable, just racist nonsense about Indians. By the way, J.D. Vance, you should not be very happy with her saying that about Indians with your Indian wife, but no. J.D. Vance will let anything slide as long as you have an R next to your name. Steve Bannon, Sloppy Steve, as Trump once called him, the guy who thinks that white people are victims of racism. I mean, for crying out loud. Like, it's a far cry from Mike Pence. Mike Pence was a religious theocrat. He was a guy who said that smoking cigarettes did not cause cancer, just spitting in the face of science, which, Trump is no stranger to doing. But Mike Pence has more morality in his pinky finger than Trump has in his entire body. I can't believe I just said Mike Pence and morality in the same sentence. But, Trump is associating with people far, far worse than Pence right now. Pence is calling out Trump over his tariffs that are crashing the stock market and that are raising taxes on the middle class. He has lost the Republican Party of 2020. That is how bad it's gotten. And I appreciate people, as much as I disagree with the Cheney family on issues, I appreciate that Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney are like, look, we're Republicans, but Kamala Harris should have won, or Kamala Harris should win in 2024. They said that, they're like, yeah, look, Trump represents just a massive threat to this country. And they probably would say that Kamala Harris is not great, but she's not great within the normal context of US politics. Trump's not great, and frankly is terrible on a whole different level. The same could be said of the comparison between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. These people are not necessarily ideal. Joe Biden's a guy who has plagiarized, a guy who voted for the Iraq War, a guy who opposed same-sex marriage, a guy who said stuff like nothing will fundamentally change on the 2020 campaign trail. And yet he got some good stuff in his legacy. He did. He might have harmed it with his conduct during the primaries, with his conduct during the 2024 election by refusing to drop out for so long. But look at all the bipartisan legislation. The history books will give glowing reviews of that. Your children will learn that Joe Biden was the guy who reached across the aisle, the Democrat who was not a partisan sycophant, did not disparage the other party in vicious terms, and actually worked on legislation with them to advance the interests of all Americans. We all benefit from stellar infrastructure. We all benefit from action on climate change. We all benefit from more welfare spending. Just general socially democratic policies. And most of that was earlier on in his term. Later on, it's a different story. He's probably harmed the Democratic Party quite a lot. But at least there's something there to unequivocally give his legacy something of a boost. I mean, same with Obama, the Affordable Care Act. There are people who will tell you straight up they are alive today thanks to the Affordable Care Act being passed. You might not like the individual mandate. I get that it's too much of a corporate handout. But the Medicaid expansion is no joke. It's nothing to scoff at. People in these states where their governors accepted the Medicaid expansion. By the way, there were only 2 Republican governors who did that. It would be John Kasich and Chris Christie. And remember how well they did in the primary in 2016? Not that great. Kasich stayed around a while, but he didn't get that many delegates. These people in these states had their lives saved by this act. This act that was only voted for by Democrats. Obama had a supermajority. He got that done. What did Trump do in his first term? He tried to pass a healthcare bill with an approval rating under 20%. A bill which would have taken away people's healthcare, would have taken away coverage for pre-existing conditions. If you want a good thought exercise in how terrible Trump is, you know what? Don't even look at the stuff he did. Look at the stuff he tried to do. And imagine that all succeeded. Imagine that all got through. Imagine losing protections for pre-existing conditions. And you might not have any, but think about your older family members who have stuff like diabetes, who might be dead if Trump got his way. Think about his failed attempts to steal the 2020 election. Think about what would have happened if there had been more Trump sycophants on the judiciary, more sycophantic judges who would have heard Trump's challenge to the election and been like, oh, interesting. Well, I think I'll humor this. It seems like some things were going wrong here. I do not think that Joe Biden won this county or that county, or, oh, I'm not going to dismiss this suit just yet. And then they found some activistic way to hand it to Trump, basically to cheat, to steal the election. And then, yeah, democracy just ends. I'll tell you this. I remember in 2018, there was a girl in my political science course who said, she asked the professor, do you think there'll be an election in 2020? Because I'm concerned that Trump might just end democracy and we won't have an election then. I thought, what on earth are you talking about? 2020 is 2 years from now. Nothing that drastic is going to happen. You sound like a left-wing version of Alex Jones. Sure enough, there was a 2020 election. I was right, and her fears did not come true. But were her fears ill-founded? Not at all. Not at all. They might have been premature, but they were not ill-founded. And we're 4 years away from the 2028 election, slightly less than 4. And that's a lot of time for Trump and his Republican House, his Republican Senate, Republican state legislatures, Republicans, Trump sycophants in the judiciary to pull some shenanigans. So I do not begrudge leftists, centrists, center-right types even, who are alarmist about the possibility for danger, a danger to our democracy under Trump in the 2028 election. I do not begrudge them that, because it could very well be the case that the Republicans steal the 2028 election, or that no election is had and J.D. Vance gets coronated to be king, to be dictator of the United States. And he'll go up there and throw Nazi salutes just like Elon Musk. It could happen. I'm not saying it will. But people who fear the worst from the Trump administration have in some ways been proven right. Proven right by what he's done in office now, what he did between Biden taking office and himself taking office, and what he did leading up to the 2020 election. And all of this just reflects incredibly poorly on his legacy. Why did he have to keep doing that? Why did he have to keep saying we should terminate the Constitution over voter fraud? Does that look good at all as a legacy? You know, we have these presidents out there giving these amazing quotes. FDR, nothing to fear but fear itself. JFK, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And Trump saying terminate the Constitution, immigrants are poisoning the blood of our country, all this toxic bile. This man does not care about his legacy. That is my verdict. Trump does not care about his legacy. If he did, we wouldn't have seen so many of the things that he's done come into place. And if he did, he wouldn't have tried so many of the things that he fortunately failed at. Some of those things which would have screwed over so many Americans across the country, destroyed Obama's legacy, or at least the good parts of it, destroyed Biden's legacy and the good parts of it in particular. And then with respect to the bad parts of Biden's legacy, Trump's putting them on steroids. Think about the Israel-Gaza policy. We're going to level Gaza. He's going to build some Trump hotels and casinos in Gaza. He and Benjamin Netanyahu. And Benjamin Netanyahu is a very corrupt guy. And he's the world leader that Trump locks arms with the most. Vladimir Putin being a close second. And that's not a good look. That is the behavior of a man who does not care about his legacy on any issue. On any issue. Let me know what you think about Trump's legacy in the comments below. Does he care about it? Do you think that he's a guy who is deeply insecure about what other people think about him? I happen to think at this point, he's just moving forward, full sociopath, not caring at all what people think about him or his legacy. And as a result, 25 years from now, my kids and your kids are going to read history books that are just slaughtering him, putting him through the ringer, and hopefully our country will be in a much better spot by then. We can only dream. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, or subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching. This has been The More the Merrier, and I look forward to speaking to you in my next video.